Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Senate Education. It is Thursday, March 11th at 1:34 p.m. Just a quick overview of the next couple of days. Today we are going to spend time, we're going to return to S100, which is an act relating to universal school breakfasts and lunches. This was sent to us by Senate Ag. And we have until tomorrow to act on it. Doesn't mean that we cannot return to this topic. In fact, I think there may be some questions that we still may need to pull apart on Tuesday and Wednesday, but we do need to act on it in order for this work to continue. We'll also be going to appropriations and finance. We'll then shift to S16, back to the amendment that we started looking at yesterday. And we've invited Mr. Diaz from the ACLU in, as well as Secretary of Education to weigh in on that. That's also something that I'm hoping we can come to an agreement on sometime tomorrow. Then we'll shift to COVID recovery. We're trying to work with, assist our friends in appropriations. I've asked Secretary French to come in to give us an overview of where things are at with ESSER funds and how dollars are being used, just so that we all are on the same page. And I'm going to need to talk to the Chair of Appropriations. We don't want to take any steps that would make things more complicated or impact how ESSER funds are distributed. You may also recall that we asked Senate appropriations for an appropriation in the expedited budget bill. So long story short, I need some clarification on the best way to move forward. And we'll be looking to the Secretary, Ms. Morehouse, who is the Executive Director of Vermont After Schools, and our Ledge Council on that. And then finally, we'll return to our draft strike all amendment of S13, which is the pupil weighting factors report implementation. So with that, I also know it's a beautiful day. We have work to do, but I'm hoping that we can finish at a reasonable time so that everybody can get out and take a well-needed, well-deserved break. I would also say, if senators, tomorrow being the last day of crossover, not seeing big problems right now, but if you would please reserve, knowing that we could go later than we usually do. We could go beyond 5 o'clock tomorrow. If you could just keep your schedules open. But again, I feel like we're narrowing in on things, and hopefully we will be able to do our work in a timely, efficient manner. With that, I would like to welcome Faye Mack and Betsy Rosenbluth. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us today, and welcome to Senate Education. We are continuing our work on S100, and we know that Ms. Mack, you are the Education Director with Hunger Free Vermont, and Ms. Rosenbluth, you are with Vermont Feed Project. You're the Project Director, for the Vermont Farm to School Network. So looking forward to hearing from both of you. And unless I see hands from colleagues on the committee, which I don't, we will turn the floor over to the two of you. Ms. Mack.
Great, thank you so much for having us. For the record, my name is Faye Mack. I'm the Advocacy and Education Director at Hunger Free Vermont. And Betsy and I are both really happy to be here today to talk about S100 as a whole. I'm going to start us off and focus in on the universal school meals component of S100, and Betsy is the better expert at the local purchasing incentive and the farm to school and early childhood grant program components. So if that sounds okay. I've also submitted pretty detailed testimony I wanted to just draw your attention to, and know that it was, I just submitted it today, and so it might be something worthwhile to take a look at afterwards, but I'll touch on it a little bit today, but won't kind of read the whole thing or anything. And I also wanted to just take a moment as we start to thank you all for all of the work that this committee has been doing to figure out how to support kids and schools during the pandemic, with especially the work that you've all been doing to help address summer, the gaps in summer, both in terms of programming and nutrition. So we're really excited about some of what's been proposed and coming out. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. There's a lot on your plate this year, and appreciate the attention to that. So as I said, I'd like to just give sort of a kind of general overview and really want to answer questions that you have. I have watched the testimony over the last couple of days that you've received, and so I'm hoping that we can help provide some answers and some clarifications to some of the questions that have come up, and are happy to answer anything that's coming up for you. So I'll share a little bit, and then really am interested in hearing what you all are curious about. So for a little bit of context, I just want to start off by sharing what we're looking at in terms of hunger right now in Vermont. Hunger continues to be at unprecedented levels. We've been seeing higher rates of hunger than we saw during the Great Recession or any other time in recent history. According to the University of Vermont, about 30% of people in Vermont have faced hunger at some point during the pandemic. During the Great Recession, we peaked at about 14% of Vermonters. So we're facing something that we haven't seen before. And we also know from that study as well that families with children are 2 times more likely to be facing hunger than families without children. So as we are talking about schools and the roles that schools have been playing this year in terms of feeding kids, it's been an incredible life support for children and for their families. The other piece about the pandemic and its impact on hunger that I want to note is that the recovery for families in terms of their economic recovery, their ability to put food on the table, afford housing and basic needs is going to take longer than the health crisis portion of the pandemic. It took Vermont 12 years to return to the rates of hunger that we saw before the Great Recession. That's a very long recovery. And we expect that we'll see a similar, some kind of long recovery again as well for folks. So as we're addressing COVID, part of addressing COVID is creating long-term systems and structures that will help bolster families through the multiple years it will take to recover from the pandemic. And universal school meals is part of that recovery and part of the effort to help end hunger. I think that you've heard a lot over the years probably about why universal school meals is so important. There is some research that's been done both in Vermont and outside of Vermont on universal school meals, because universal school meals has been operating in schools in Vermont and across the country for many years. There are some schools in Vermont that have been providing universal school meals for decades. Many schools started providing universal school meals about 5 or 6 years ago. And so there's some data in my testimony from studies in Vermont and also studies in places like New York City that really address the health and learning and school climate impacts that universal school meals have. Most notably, I just want to point out that universal school meals improves performance in math and English language arts by up to 10 weeks of learning, which is essentially the summer slide that students experience in low-income families. It also has proven to have positive impacts on obesity rates and on school climate. One of the things that schools in Vermont have reported is that universal school meals completely transforms the relationship that administrators have with caregivers and with families, because it removes money from the relationship. Principals are often the debt collectors. And so when they're no longer having to chase down families for school meal debt, families are much more open to building positive relationships and answering the phone when the principal calls and are able to focus on the child and the child's health and well-being. the other thing that we've learned through the research is that 42% of children who are living in food insecure households in Vermont are not currently eligible for free school meals or 3 Squares Vermont. They live in families who earn too much money. They're above income for those programs. And so we know that as long as we don't have universal school meals in schools, there are children who are going hungry who don't have access to school meals. And so there was some conversation about kind of what school meals look like today. And when I say today, I mean pre-pandemic today, 2019-2020 school year. There were 78 schools in Vermont, both public and independent schools, who were providing universal school meals already. And in those schools, they were not collecting school meal applications. All student participation in school meal programs was higher than in schools without universal school meals. And in the schools that were not providing universal school meals, we know that because of the shame and stigma associated with school meals and the cost of school meals, children who both were eligible for free school meals and those who weren't eligible for free school meals but needed them aren't participating in the meal program. I want to also just touch on how school meals programs are paid for. That was something that I've heard come up a little bit. So school meal programs are paid for by a combination of different funding sources. All schools participating in the federal programs are receiving federal funding. They're receiving some state funding, and then they help pay for their programs through other sources of revenue, which includes the fees that families pay for a full price meal, along with adults eating, catering, selling snacks, and different sources of revenue. For most schools in Vermont, all those sources of funding don't actually cover the full cost of the school meal program. And so the remainder of the school meal program budget is incorporated into the school budget and borne by the education fund. And so that's happening in most schools today. And the universal school meals component of S100 doesn't actually change that. So it keeps the funding structure the same, where after all of the different sources of revenue and the federal dollars that are coming in for the program, anything that's left over in the school meal budget is incorporated into the school budget. I will note that S100 does keep that cost exempt from the excess spending limit, though. And I think I have that phrase right, but I might not. The other thing that I want to just note about universal school meals is that right now, any school in Vermont can provide universal school meals by enrolling in one of the federal provisions to do so. So that's how we have the 78 schools who are already providing universal school meals. They're doing so through federal options that allow them, enrolling in a federal option that allows them to provide universal school meals. And that's required in S100, that schools would enroll in those. And that helps ensure that schools are drawing down the maximum amount of federal dollars that they have available to them for the program. What S100 provides schools that they don't currently have is some additional support in making that transition. So S100 includes an additional position with the Agency of Education. And I know you've heard from them at how crucial that position is for their ability to support schools in making that transition. So we're very supportive of that position. And it also provides some one-time funding to help schools offset some of the cost of making this transition to universal school meals. And that might be that a school needs to invest in a new refrigerator or oven to help get ready for the increased school meal participation. They might need a little bit of administrative support to do the paperwork to enroll in the federal program, or they might need some help offsetting some of the cost of just making that transition. And so there's funding available through S100 for that. And that's it. That's not available today for schools. And one of the things that we've heard from the Agency of Education over the past 6 or so months is that a number of schools have reached out to them saying, we love what's happening right now, being able to provide universal school meals. And when these temporary waivers from the USDA end, we don't want to go back to the old model. We want to enroll in the federal options and continue. And without S100, these schools won't have that financial support or the additional capacity at the Agency of Education to help them do that. And finally, the last thing that I want to just note around that is that the bill includes a 5-year transition period, and that's, we think, pretty crucial for schools. Some schools, like the ones who've already reached out to the Agency of Education, are ready to go now and they want to make that transition. And some are going to need a couple of years to get ready to make that transition. And so the bill allows for that time for schools to come as they want to. And it also allows for the impact of the cost of going to universal school meals to be spread out over 5 years, so that the impact sort of grows over time instead of all happening in 1 year, so it's kind of spreads it out in a way that we think is really helpful. And so that's sort of an overview. I also am happy to address the school meal, the forms question around how schools collect income information. If members of the committee are curious about that. And
sure, that would be good. Why don't you do that? And then we
yeah,
can take some questions and pass it on to Ms. Rosenbluth.
Perfect. So in the written testimony that I submitted, I wrote, there's a couple pages about the forms because it has come up as a very rightful concern as the income information that's collected through school meal applications is really critical for schools. In Vermont, we don't require that information for any state funding, but it is required for federal funding for a number of non-nutrition programs, and that income information is needed for eligibility for other nutrition programs like summer meal programs. It doesn't have to be collected through the school meal application though. And actually moving away from collecting that information through the school meal application creates a huge opportunity for schools to not only collect that data better and with more simple, really hone in on what it is that they need, but it also allows them to reframe the purpose of that information and to create more transparency about why they're asking families to fill out that form and to collect that information. Right now, it's tied to school meals. So if a family doesn't think that they're eligible for school meals, or their children don't want school meals because of the stigma associated with getting a free school meal under the current model, they're not going to fill out the form. But when schools move away from using the school meal application to collect the form, they can say very clearly, here's a form, it goes home with the same forms as filling out your emergency contacts and the other kinds of forms that families have to fill out every year. And they're able to really say, we need this information to help our community and our school get important federal funding. So we ask everyone to fill it out. And it can be framed in a really positive way whereby filling it out, you're actually helping your school and helping your community. And so the language in S100 right now allows the Agency of Education to create the best practices for doing so. And that is great flexibility because I think, as they mentioned, they have an interagency work group right now who are working on figuring out what those best practices are. So it allows those best practices to evolve over time and instructs schools to work with the Agency of Education to collect that information. And what we know in the 78 schools who are currently providing universal school meals in Vermont and in other parts of the country is that when schools move to a different way of collecting that information, they aren't seeing broad-based declines in their eligibility for federal funding. It hasn't actually shifted all that much on a whole. So that information is really important. And by moving away from school meal applications, there's actually a pretty exciting opportunity to tackle it in a whole new way.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Mack? It was all very helpful. This is, this was in ag for a while. They worked hard, and we have the opportunity to take a look. Senator Perschlick.
Thank you. Faye, what did you say about the excess spending? I missed that because I was thinking before, maybe last year, we were talking about this, that we were talking about if they spend more money, like if you offer universal meals, that we would exempt that from the excess spending limit. But I just want missing the context of it here. If it's if it's free, then what the excess spending would be. You know what I mean?
Sure.
If it's part of the statewide education fund.
Sure. So the impact is so the way that it works, and Jim, I know that Jim is here and he might be able to clarify exactly how it's written into the bill. But the cost of going to universal school meals will be different for each school as they transition to universal school meals. We estimate that the total impact overall after the 5-year ramp up period will be about $20 to $25 million. And I know you heard the Joint Fiscal Office's fiscal note, which we're really excited about yesterday. And so that's the total impact on the education fund. What it will actually mean for individual schools is dependent on the school meal program and the size of the school, the socioeconomic status of the student population, the kind of the income levels, and a number of other factors about how their school meal program works. So that's where, as schools are developing their school budget and they're looking at their school meal program and the increased investment that moving to universal school meals will cost, that is excluded from the excess spending.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Mack? Ms. Rosenbluth. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Chittenden, please.
So this is a naive question, but I fully support feeding our kids. It's the right thing to do. What I'm struggling with is what Senator Lyons has asked about this a couple of times, which is I feel like we're missing a willingness to pay from families out there that have the capacity to contribute to feeding our children. And to trying to think of coming up with a $20 to $30 million and being sensitive to that. Can you tell me about previous discussions about how you find the middle class and upper class families that do send their kids to public schools, ways to capture what they are able and willing to contribute to cover the collection of monies to provide for universal foods?
Sure. So universal school meals means that no child or their family have to pay for the meal, that it's paid for as part of the way that we are educating our kids. And what we know is that until we hit full universal status, where no single kid is separated because of their household income, we will not see low income and food insecure children actually eat school meals. There's a big component about the success of the program is the shift in school culture and the shift in the climate in the cafeteria when money is removed from the meals. You start to see children sit at tables with each other who don't normally sit at tables with each other. Children who often say they're not hungry during school lunch suddenly start eating school lunch. We see teachers start to eat more school lunches, which they continue to pay for. And it's part of that shift where we all come together during lunchtime to all eat, because eating nutritious food together is how we learn and how we prepare ourselves to learn. So that's, I think, just important, kind of the foundational piece about what makes universal school meals successful. Families with higher incomes, the way that the education fund works, and I am not an education fund expert, but my understanding is that families with higher incomes are paying higher taxes and are paying more into the education fund. So they are paying for the universal school meals program, and they're paying for school meals through the education fund in the way that we're paying for the program. So rather than have families pay that in their taxes and also have to send money to the school for an individual meal, it's incorporated. So we are still having, the weight on how much each family is contributing into the school budgets and into the school meal programs does still mean that higher income families are paying more.
Please continue.
Just as a quick follow-up, I get that. That makes sense. I'm a big proponent of rational taxation, a rational assessment. And it seems reasonable to me to have those that are benefiting from the free foods that can afford it to pay something into it. Whereas what you just described is really everybody with high incomes, not necessarily children. Again, I'm fully supportive of feeding our kids. It's what we need to do. I'm just wondering if there's a way to find this financial amount, this $20 to $30 million, tapping into the families of middle and upper income that are benefiting from these universal school meals. But that's a discussion for the Finance Committee and not necessarily here.
And I would just add, keeping in mind, anybody can amend a bill at any time and in any committee. Senator Terenzini, please.
Thank you, Senator Campion and Faye. Ms. Mack, I appreciate very much your testimony. I really love the idea of feeding all of our students. The thing I come back to, and I was gently reminded yesterday that we're not the Appropriations Committee. I get it, but the part that I come back to is the $24 to $40 million a year. Secretary French said 50 million the other day. That is a huge price tag on the taxpayers and businesses of Vermont. And I just don't know how I can go back to my constituents of Rutland County and say that I know that many of you are struggling. I know many of your businesses haven't been open in the last year consistently because of the pandemic, but I just voted to raise the overall tax burden of Vermonters $25 to $50 million. And that's where I'm hung up on this concept. To me, maybe it's not the right time to address this because of everything else we have going on in our state right now. So I'm really hung up on, I like the concept. I'm just really hung up on the portion of how expensive this is going to be to the average hardworking Vermonter. So if you have any insights in how I can sell it to my constituents, I'd love to hear it, because it just isn't settling well with me right now.
Sure. It is. I won't discount the cost. 20 million, 30 million. It's a significant investment in our students. And it's a small portion of the overall education fund. So I see both of those as impacts as we're talking about the cost. I will also say that Hunger Free Vermont and our partners are working very hard to help make to have this paid for more broadly by the federal government. So there are a lot of opportunities right now to change the way that school meals are paid for, and eligibility into these different, how these different provisions that schools enroll in for the federal provisions for universal school meals, how the funding structure works, so that because the federal government is paying for the school meal program as well. And moving to universal school meals, I will also just note that we expect after the 5-year ramp up period, about a $10 million a year increase in the federal dollars that are coming in for the program. That doesn't offset the state investment, but there will be more federal dollars coming in for the program as well, because we'll be feeding 65% more meals every day. We'll see a big increase. The other thing too, I would just say is that many schools are already making this decision. So the Rutland City School District, for example, provides universal school meals, and they're enrolled in these federal provisions, as are a number of others. I know Senator Terenzini, that's part of the community that you represent. And additionally, the Slate Valley Union School District is a really good example of a school district who have gone ahead and made this investment already. So it costs the Slate Valley School District an increased investment in order to provide universal school meals, and their communities have decided that it's worth it in their school budget. So we are seeing this, this already happen. And what we know is that there are schools that want to do this, and there are school districts that will continue to build toward universal school meals. And this legislation helps provide some support for that, and some financial support, and ensures that all schools eventually get there, so that we don't end up with 10% of Vermont kids without access to school meals because they happen to live in a couple of zip codes where they don't have universal school meals, and it's really truly equitable access. But I don't want to discount what your concern, Senator.
Senator Lyons. Senator Terenzini, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you, but I wanted to thank Faye for the nice explanation.
Great. Senator Lyons, please.
Okay, thank you. As we're going along, some of the guardrails that you have talked about that are in place are a little bit more reassuring about ensuring equitable treatment across the board. So let me be clear that right now there are 78 schools enrolled in the federal program that provides dollars for free meals for kids. Is that
So,
Yes.
so most schools in Vermont are enrolled in the National School Breakfast and National School Lunch Program, and that provides federal dollars to support school meals under a paid and free and reduced model. And then 78 schools in Vermont are enrolled in the federal provisions within those programs that allow them to provide universal school meals.
Okay, and once all schools are enrolled in that program, which is mandated in the bill, then what will the need be? What will be the residual need for
Yeah.
for meals? Go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand your questions, Caroline. Do you mean the need for students or the financial need?
Yes, both. I mean,
Okay. So we estimate in terms of, so 100% of children are not going to eat school meals on a given day. What we have seen in schools in Vermont who have been providing universal school meals over the last number of years is that, and I'm pulling up the numbers right now, they're the same numbers that the Joint Fiscal Office is using. It's about 60% of students eating school breakfast and 75% of students eating school lunch. And so the impact of all schools moving to universal school meals is about 18,000 more kids eating school lunch on any given day in Vermont, and about 23,000 more kids eating school breakfast on any given day. We see a bigger increase in breakfast. There's a lot more room to grow within school breakfast. So that's a bit of a sense of kind of how many children we expect to be eating school meals. There will always be families who choose to send meals to school, and that's totally fine. The idea is that this is available. School meals are available to kids if they want them,
Okay.
and then it's coupled with the work that Betsy can talk about around local purchasing and farm to school, which really help improve school meal quality and get more kids excited about school meals. And we see participation increase there as well.
So then another question that I'm not sure where this question lands, but as we've been looking at the weighting study, and free and reduced lunch is a part of that decision making within weights for kids, and I'm wondering that will still be an issue. Low economic families will still be an issue, but it will not. I don't see how it can then be related. I'm going to have to change that. That's all I'm saying.
That's part of collecting the income information from students using a different form that's not tied to school meals.
Yes.
And that's what the 78 schools who are currently providing universal school meals, they're doing that now and providing that data for things like weighting.
Okay, because one of the concerns that I heard from one of my school districts, which is fairly affluent and has a high median income, and that was my question. Not my question, but our question in our discussion was how to use maybe a regional median income or some other value as part of the weighting process.
And I don't know enough about the weighting to really answer
none
that.
Of us do. We're all changing it anyway, so it doesn't matter.
What I do know is that for federal funding, there's some specific data that's needed. I imagine the state has flexibility in determining what data they use for their own calculations.
Yeah, I mean, certainly food and nutrition is critical to success in school. There's no question about it. But we also know that socioeconomic status is extremely powerful in achievement. So I'm just wondering what our measurement will be going forward. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Rosenbluth, would you like to add some new information to this conversation? Things that the committee doesn't know that you believe is important for us to know?
Thank you, Chair. The Farm to School Network believes that S100 will make a substantial impact on COVID recovery in the state, as well as the health of Vermont's kids and farmers. It's a win-win, as I think we're all talking about. preventing kids from going hungry, supporting families, benefiting the economy and Vermont farmers. I mean, we invest so much now to support the education of our kids, and we know that hungry kids cannot bring their best to the classroom. And I think in addition to what Faye has been talking about, in schools with universal meals, we have seen a decline in nurse visits, behavior interventions, better attendance. There's a lot of factors that you have to address one way or another. And we've seen both in Vermont and in places like New York City that has universal meals, some really compelling data about the positive impact. If you think about it, over half a child's daily nutrition can come from school meals. And as we mentioned, Farm to School just improves that participation and the excitement around school meals in general. With the local purchasing incentive and the Farm to School aspects of the bill, we have wide support from school nutrition directors who are squeezed to provide a nourishing lunch for something close to $1.20 a plate to cover the food costs. So an incentive that increases what the programs have in their budget to spend on local food, even 15 cents, really makes a huge difference in making that decision whether they're going to buy a local apple or local dairy or even local beef. Schools overall have been spending $15.5 million every year on food, and we just want to capture more of those dollars to stay in Vermont. So the bill has a goal of 20% Vermont food, Vermont products, and that would translate to over $3 million annually going directly to Vermont producers, or almost $5 million contributed to Vermont's economy. And the program, as Senator Pearson mentioned, has been very successful in other states. New Mexico, Michigan, New York, Oregon have all done some version, and we've been able to talk to our colleagues and benefit from some of the lessons learned. And that's the design of the program that you see. We've worked on it for over a year with AOE's Child Nutrition Program, and it creates an on-ramp for schools to put systems in place for local purchasing, and it gives AOE child nutrition staff a year before they're distributing the incentive grants. And both the Agency of Agriculture and the Farm to School Network are ready to help schools and AOE with success of the program. Last thing I just want to note is that we are asking you to fully fund the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program at $500,000 to meet the goal of supporting Farm to School and early childhood across the state in every community. And we know that 90% of our brains are developed by age 5, so it is just so critical that our young children have access to good nutrition and are exposed to healthy new foods when their tastes are developing. And I think especially right now with the rates of food insecurity that Faye referred to. The technical assistance that's provided through the grants program helps schools work towards universal school meals, improving nutrition, increasing local purchasing. All of these elements in the bill work together to create change that supports schools to benefit the kids. And I think I'll just stop there. If there's any questions on those aspects of the program, I'm happy to answer that.
Any questions? We are continuing our conversation on this topic tomorrow with members of the Agency of Education and school personnel. But this has been very helpful. Senator Lyons.
Right. No. So thank you, Betsy. This is, and Faye, but both of you, this is really, it's been comprehensive and I really appreciate it. In terms of the sort of the getting the fresh foods and farm to school piece, so how will that be administered? That's number one. Is that all going to be a local administration process? And do we have a a purchasing pool that we use to purchase foods from our local farms and distribute them broadly across the state, trying to figure that out a little bit. And then that's it for now.
Mhm. Now, those are excellent questions. There is a buying group cooperative with the independent food service directors, and they have a contract with a broadline distributor. And with this program, they would be working with Reinhardt, who has that contract right now, to make sure that it's very clear the Vermont foods on that truck that the school nutrition directors can purchase and can track and can use as part of the program. Schools also really like to buy directly in their own community, if they're farms or bakeries or whatever that might be. And sometimes they have that direct relationship where they'll do a direct buy. And there's food hubs across the state that are offering Vermont food, Food Connects, Green Mountain Farm Direct. So that's a third way that schools have a contract with those food hubs to deliver, to their loading dock Vermont products. So it varies, but there's opportunities where schools are not reinventing the wheel or trying to figure out. We do provide a fair amount of technical assistance to make sure that all their bid documents follow all the rules and regulations, and connect with farmers if they want that connection. So they have some support. 90% of schools are buying at least something. It might just be Vermont apples or some Vermont dairy. And so this is an incentive to greatly expand some of what is happening. And I would say the food service management companies like the Abbey Group and Cafe Services, they also are on board and excited about this. So they have figured out as well a way to be purchasing local.
Thank you. I just, as you're talking through this, and I remember my first session, I was vice chair of agriculture, and Senator Cattell from Franklin County brought in I think it was Jen Boucher from the Agency of Agriculture. I think it was a department then. And we talked about how we could get food from farms to kids at school. And so started, talking about all of this so long ago, but you have taken it to such a great in such a great direction. So thank you both for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Please stay in touch as we make our way through this. As I said, we do need to take a vote tomorrow, one way or the other, but we may continue testimony next week to see, since it has a ways to go still in 2 other committees, which would allow us to get more information in case the committee does want to propose any kinds of amendments. So thank you both.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Diaz.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you all?
Good, thanks. Good to see
Very
you.
interesting discussion. Very nice to be here.
You have been with us before on S16. You've been one of the big proponents over the past several years with Senator Sears and others on this. You have seen an amendment that we are putting forward, and we started to look at the amendment yesterday, and I think overall there were some questions. So wondering if you might just say a few words, having seen the amendment, support for it, concerns, suggestions that you might have, and then we can have a dialogue with you.
Happily. So just a few words. The amendment, the ACLU of course supports the amendment. We are very interested in not only having data about school discipline, or at least allowing this commission to have the data that it needs to do the job that the legislature is asking it to do. But but to ensure that all categories and things that are typically where we find disparities in school discipline are at their fingertips, and not just that information, but that it can be analyzed in a way that is that allows the commission to really figure out like where are the connections, and that's the section about being cross-tabulated. So it's we support the amendment. It adds a few key things to make sure that a few key data points to make sure that the commission has the information that it needs to do its work. Without this information, we think that the commission is going to be at a deficit, and so we're hopeful that this information can be provided to them. Most of this information is available and has been available in previous Agency of Education reports on school discipline that I mentioned in my last testimony. They did 2 to this committee in 2016 and 2017 that included most, if not all, of the information that this amendment seeks to include as well. And I'll stop there. I apologize that I was not able to watch yesterday's review of the amendment, but I look forward to answering your questions if I can.
No problem at all. Thanks for being here. That's very helpful. Questions following up on yesterday's discussion. Senator Perchlik?
No, I don't have any specific language, but it sounds like Mr. Diaz is supportive of the bill as amended, which was one thing I was just wondering of, because I think it's a little different than if you were to go through from his report, kicked out, I think it was called, or that the things that was recommended in there, we might not be doing all those. We're kind of taking an intermittent step, but it looks like we're going in the direction that was recommended. So I just confirming that he feels that we're following the reports that were issued in the past.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes, I think we're supportive of the bill as a step forward. We certainly hope that the commission, and we'll tell this to the commission if they bring people in, or if we're a part of it, that there are certain things that we hope to see recommended in accordance with what the data is telling us. We agree that gathering data and having stakeholders at the table is important to actually coming up with meaningful solutions. So, I think it's a great first step down the road towards really addressing the disparities in exclusionary discipline in our schools.
Senator Hooker, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Diaz. One of the concerns about the amendment was about the collection of data at small schools and disaggregating the data and therefore kind of exposing personally identifiable information. Can you talk about that and maybe ways to get around that, or do you see that as a problem or not? Thanks.
So as a ACLU attorney, we are very cognizant of privacy concerns, of course, as a organization that fights for the right to privacy in a number of fronts. On this issue, we think that I'm at least not seeing a major privacy concern. I'm aware of FERPA, and it is a complex and somewhat labyrinthine law, I'll say. It is never really clear to me, how exactly it applies when you're talking about just data points. However, my thinking was that this is just data that's going to the commission. Not all of it has to be released to the public. And so it's still within a state apparatus or a state entity. So hopefully that would handle some of those issues. I think the Agency of Education's lawyers will do everything they can to make sure that they're not violating FERPA. But my hope is that the commission can have all the information it needs in order to make decisions that make sense for the entire state. I hope that I know that's not maybe a full answer to the question, but I hope it's useful.
Thank you.
Senator Lyons, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. This is very helpful. I think yesterday we did talk about the data collection, the disaggregation, and what that little section actually meant. But I do have another question about the categories that are listed here for data collection. And understanding that you're trying to get at the variables that might contribute to a greater disciplinary actions for some kids over others. And knowing that tiered support and PBI are related to mitigating against social determinants. And I'm wondering if there was any thought to including any of that sort of epidemiological analysis of family situation, exposure to drugs, a single parent home, that kind of information that is very informative when children have behavioral problems, and including this kind of discipline. So knowing that there is a strong interest in understanding the racial disparities or gender differences and so on, but was there any thought about, or could there be some thought about some of these other areas?
I think there certainly could be some thought about them. My understanding of the amendment or the categories in the amendment is that those are categories that schools traditionally track. So, and that's why they were included. And so I'm not sure, and because schools, as we all know, do a lot of data collection. And so this was trying to mirror some of that. And again, it also, if the data is not there for some of these things, it may cause the commission to make recommendations about what additional data needs to be gathered if possible. But yeah, my understanding is at least the data that's currently there gives it.
I know we might currently be collecting all the data and we might not actually be getting down to the exact information that is going to help us understand how to change the direction. So I don't know, maybe is there a way to add something in here about exploring new data categories without defining those, maybe related to social determinants, something like that?
Certainly. I mean, I think that's something the commission, that you all could add, and that the commission could be tasked with.
You want to work on some language, Senator Lyons, with Mr. Desmarais?
Yeah,
See if we can bring it to us tomorrow.
Okay, we'll do that.
That sounds okay.
As long as Jim is willing to help me, I'm glad to do it.
Always.
Okay.
Always there. Any other questions for Mr. Diaz? Okay. Thank you, Jay.
Great. No, thank you all for your work on this bill and the many others. There's a lot. You're all very busy, so I really appreciate the work that's been going on, especially in terms of equity issues this session.
Thank you. And we know how to reach you and where to reach you if we run into any other questions. So, Senator Hooker, before we go, you're on the floor with this probably Tuesday. Any other questions from you?
Not right now, but I would like to talk with Jim and maybe with Senator Lyons as crafting more language for the amendment and just get some clarification on, what we expect from the amendment.
Can I, maybe Please. I could add something. I'm looking at the, on page 3 of the proposal that we have in between the yellow. And it does say recommend changes to the types of data collected and data collection processes. So I'm wondering if we could include in there something about data collection related to the contribution of social determinants, something like that, to suspensions and expulsions. Something just so it's there. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be fully explicit or a big deal, but a little something to move it along.
Jim, do you need any other language besides that from Senator Lyons?
I don't. That's very clear.
And I don't see any objections to adding something like that. And Senator Lyons, if this were to pop up as a question in any way on the floor, we'll look to you to.
Sure, Senator Hooker will be really good at
There's
responding.
no question.
Will coach me beforehand.
Yeah. There's no question about that. And great. Anything else before we move on to Secretary French's eyes and comments on this amendment? And Mr. Diaz, if you're able to stay on, we would welcome that. Thank you for your help. Thank you for your support. And we may be calling on you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be here.
Thanks. Secretary French, good afternoon. Very much appreciate you coming in. We know you're equally as busy this time of year, being pulled in all sorts of directions. We are continuing our work on S16, which is in appropriations, and where we're hoping to get their support. We appreciate all the work you've already done on S16 and your support in moving in this direction. We do have an amendment that I know was shared with you where we, the Pro Tem and Senator Hardy came to a few of us asking to disaggregate some of this data. And we've heard from our Ledge Counsel, Mr. Diaz at the ACLU, and now eager to hear your thoughts on this. So with that, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. I have not seen the amendment, so I just received the invitation to testify about an hour ago. So I'm unfamiliar with what's being proposed. I apologize. I couldn't find it on your website.
The apology is mine. I'm just looking to see if our committee assistant, Ms. Lowell, might have it for us, or might it be on the website?
It is there.
It is there.
It's under S16. I don't think it's on today's document.
Probably on yesterday's document.
I don't know where. Yeah.
See if I can find it.
I can change it.
Can you put it on today's?
Yep.
Thanks, Jeannie. While we're doing this, I can just mention a little bit, Mr. Secretary, what we're trying to do is specify and collect, what kind of data are we looking for? Our concerns, and I know you share them around, our students from the BIPOC community, our disabled students, our other students, who is experiencing these suspensions and expulsions. We're trying to get information, more specific information that will inform this commission as it moves to do this work. And gathering data and having this data in front of stakeholders and those involved, we feel I don't want to speak for the committee. I feel like we're leaning in that direction of finding that to be an important thing.
Yeah, I'm still having trouble finding the amendment.
Because it takes a while for the system to load it.
Secretary French has sent it to you by email too. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll look for it there. Yeah, I got it there. Thanks.
Yeah.
If you want to take a moment and go off screen, Secretary French, and read it, we are happy to take a quick 5-minute stretch.
No, I can read it pretty quickly. And when you say amendments, this is, I'll just read through.
The yellow.
Yep.
So much for the stretch. problem with having such a smart and talented Secretary of Education.
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't go that far. Yeah, so you're specifying the disaggregation. That's what I'm picking up on.
That's correct.
Yeah. All data was disaggregated by minimum following subgroups. This shall be cross-tabulated by. So this is prescribing some reporting format, basically, is how I view it. Is that fair? Let's see. And
Yep.
the task force shall make to end suspensions. Okay, and define this is my best practice. Compile available data and the data collection regarding suspensions. Total number of missed, total. Yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with that. It's, my concern, just to reiterate previously, I've read through this whole thing now, was about prescribing data elements, I'll call them, that, that might or might not exist in the federal data dictionary. So I don't see that concern here from what I'm reading. It's certainly, I think, appropriate to have a group make recommendations to improve data collections if they're insufficient. And I know that claim was made in the earlier version of the draft, which I think is totally appropriate. I was concerned about that group then defining what those data elements were or should be without, they certainly could make recommendations in that regard, but to actually do it I think is problematic. And my other concern was that they would also be involved in the collection of the data. What I read here is more about reporting, making sense of the information and making recommendations. So there's nothing here I think that would be problematic from the agency standpoint. I think the reporting format would be improved because I know that's been an issue. But we certainly also, as I make the point last time, if the reporting systems that we have or the collections that we have are deemed to be insufficient for Vermont purposes, then we should endeavor to create new data collections. But it needs to be acknowledged, firstly, that there is a world, a universe of data elements out there. And I know Vermont's a very special and unique place, but I find it hard to imagine that there aren't somehow already defined in that larger data dictionary the elements that we would find useful. And I think I circulated to you anyway, Senator Campion, the report that the AOE was asked to do in 2017 on this issue on exclusionary disciplines. It sort of talked about some of the data elements that are available in the small n size and so forth. But I think as amended, this is an improvement to the concerns that I had previously.
Okay.
And I've circulated written testimony to you as well.
Yeah, no, yeah. Appreciate that. And we can go back and
I would just underscore the point too, that I'm willing as secretary, as any secretary should, to be held accountable for the data reporting requirements. That is one of the essential responsibilities of the secretary.
right.
And the General Assembly should expect and query the agency to produce reports and so forth. My earlier concern was like you were setting up another group to have responsibility over specific data collection. And that's just one of those contributing factors that undermines our capability to actually do what we're supposed to do. If we're not doing something well, then you should expect us to do it better. But to add on some other group at cross purposes actually distracts us from doing what is an essential requirement of our function.
Right. Mr. Diaz, while you're here, and Mr. Demarais, any concerns or questions, committee members, of course, first and foremost, as we can just have a conversation about this as we're at this stage. Jim.
I just want to address the comment earlier from Senator Hooker about concerns about privacy. The language does say subject to state and federal privacy laws. So it would not allow the release of information even to the task force if that release would violate federal or state privacy laws.
Okay. Questions? Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate it very much. I don't know if you're able to stay on with us for a little bit. We are going to just take a quick break until 2:45 and return, and would love to just have 15 minutes of your time to talk about what we've been talking a lot about this session, and that is sort of COVID recovery.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Senate Education. It is Thursday afternoon, March 11th, 2:47 p.m. We are now shifting gears and talking about COVID recovery. And this is something that we are partnering with our colleagues in appropriations on, and certainly the Agency of Education. And just to bring everyone back to, for a moment, we did send Senate Appropriations a memorandum on February 19th that specified dollars going into what I guess you would call COVID recovery for students broadly, and there was this is for the expedited budget, and in that we did say we would like to have $4 million to the After School for All grants program to provide grants for children to attend summer and after school programs. Senate Appropriations is interested in knowing whether or not we, well, I think they would like for us to build some language around how those grants would be distributed. But we also know that there are a lot of people working on this issue right now, and nobody knows that better than the Secretary of Education, since he's been in contact with schools. He's also managing ESSER funds, et cetera. So we don't want to make any errors, nor do we want to duplicate work that's already being done. So I thought we would just take a few minutes and get an update from Secretary of Education. Mr. Secretary, I just brought us back to February 19th when we put that proposal out, something that I know you were helpful with when you were in our committee. And we also have Ms. Holly Morehouse here, who has also been tracking this work, working with us. So I'm wondering, Mr. Secretary, if you would just take some time to fill us in what your needs are, what you're supporting, what you're trying to do, and how we can be helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm thinking an efficient way to think about this is there's two parallel activities. One of them is the money, and we can glean a lot from that by looking at ESSER in particular, the ESSER funds, the Elementary Secondary Education Relief Funds. The other is sort of the planning process and where we as a state are relative to COVID response. So I think it's useful to look at the money because the ESSER program, under the CARES Act originally, ESSER was established back in April. No one knew what was in front of us. We knew schools were going to have costs to buy PPE, you name it. And the CARES Act was this bigger strategy. Underneath there was a discrete strategy for schools called ESSER. The idea was to get the money out to districts immediately. Who knows what's in front of us? And really, I would argue that was focused on reopening schools. And this was April, but people were already starting to anticipate what was going to be needed over the summer. PPE, shields, you name it, supplies, feeding kids. And that was the ESSER program. It was created in that instance, and Vermont received about $31 million. And we have the way that program's set up to 10% of that may be reserved by the SEA, the Agency of Education, and the 90% of it has to be delivered directly to school districts. So the bulk of the money has to go out to the districts directly. So at the point I just mentioned, that the structural aspect of ESSER is the same structure we have now for ESSER, both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, what's about to be ESSER 3 tomorrow, apparently, even though the circumstances are changed for us. And that's important to acknowledge. And the agency set aside the 10%. We've been reserving up to the maximum. We knew very early, even last April, that we were going to be attentive to any statewide work that needs to happen. Not a lot emerged other than the agencies need to have communication support. So we made some investment in some IT ability because we were managing a significant communications effort. Even like the vaccination program is almost 90% communications. But we've been keeping our powder dry on that state set aside money because we knew the next phase, sort of this recovery phase, when we start talking about, what are the needs, what's the impact on kids, there's going to be a whole lot of state level activity work that has to kick in. So ESSER 1, $31 million last April. Then recently in December, ESSER 2, $127 million. Same setup, state may reserve up to 10%, districts get 90% of the money. And we're just about to turn that on now for districts. And for our districts, that's what we're saying is that's really the money you should be using for recovery. You know, sort of the other challenge here, again, to speak specifically about Vermont, is that still the national narrative is about reopening schools. Of course, Vermont schools have been open, like many states, since September. So it's not really the costs and the money for us aren't really about reopening schools. And particularly when we start talking about ESSER 3, that's still very much, you hear the national narrative in the last 48 hours about whatever schools need to reopen. And it's important to acknowledge that, you know, our situation's a little different, and as is many states, are many states that are in a similar situation. So we figure ESSER 2 is about recovery for school districts. That's how we've been messaging that. When we look at ESSER 3, we start to see some elements of the recovery. And this is my comments to you earlier today, Senator Campion, that it's important to note that, once again, the ESSER 3, this is now going to be about $290 million for education in Vermont. It has specific, you know, there's still the 90-10 split, state versus LEAs, the districts, but now there are specific targeted set-asides that have to be addressed. Learning loss, 5% set aside for that at the SEA level, 1% for summer programming, 1% for comprehensive after school. You know, so the point is, this is going to be the significant pot of money that districts are going to leverage to do this work. There is already a prescription in the federal program to focus on summer, which everyone has as probably one of their prominent strategies right now, but also after school. So I just sort of point that out, that the federal money is already aligned that way. It's going to be very, I think, generous in terms of the need that we have as a state. And therefore, we're going to need to have a strategic conversation with all the stakeholders, including the General Assembly, about what is the best use of this sort of one-time money to really ensure, I think, all students have their needs met.
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Speaker? So you said this ESSER 3, which is going to be signed hopefully today, that has the 290 million in it.
That's correct.
And that will come down, you know, as you mentioned, there are certain percentages that are dictated that have to go to certain things. And you will still keep 10% of that. Is that accurate?
We may keep up to 10%. It's our intention to do that.
Okay. All right. And that 10% would go, is that sort of a cushion? And you tell me, actually, what
it's reserved by the SEA, meaning and directed by the secretary, essentially, to focus on state level strategies relative to COVID relief. So, for example, one of the examples in our sort of regular meetings with the Department of Mental Health on this, we know we're going to need to work on a solution in the Northeast Kingdom, just because of the situation with Northeast Kingdom Human Services right now. We could be using these state level funding to subgrant out to regional partnerships to address mental health, so just figuring out those kind of subgranting processes by which we would deal with regional issues and state level issues relative to the emergency that would transcend individual district boundaries, because the district money is really going to be focused on the district and their communities. But as soon as we start talking about cross district boundaries, integrated service delivery models, that's how we see that state level money functioning in the landscape. So we're, again, here too, we're going to need to have a strategic conversation about how to leverage those funds as the need emerge. So and to sort of transition over to the planning side of the conversation, that's where how we figure out what the need is. So we have a lot of ideas, like we know a lot of the tools like summer school, after school programming. These are tools we might have, but we need to pay attention, I think, initially as to what is the need. And that's where the planning comes into play. I will say in this ESSER 3, there is a requirement that school districts have an ESSER 3 spending plan, and that they go through a local public comment process as they create their grant applications. So we're intending to bring over this recovery planning activity at the state level, which should position our districts very well to leverage their federal dollars. And that was one of our intentions by engaging in this planning process. So we see districts going into a first phase of needs assessment, real quick. Now, this is like a triage. We really need them to sort of at a high level figure out what does the student need in 3 domains. One of them is academics, social, emotional. The third domain is sort of the reconnection piece, which gets us into truancy issues. We need sort of a district by district assessment about what those needs are. And I say that because if you just take academics and this concept of quote unquote of learning loss, how that plays out at the kindergarten level is different than the high school level. And there's been such a mix of delivery models with kids. Not all kids have fallen behind, some have. I think we can guess that any kid that was at risk prior to the emergency is probably more at risk now. But those things need to be articulated at a sort of an initial level at the district, in a district regional basis. So that sort of initial phase to start to stand up what's out there, and we can sort of at the state level then sort of look for those patterns, because I'm guessing there will be patterns around truancy and engagement that will require organization and collaboration from state services, such as the AOE and DCF and so forth. So the first sort of segment of that planning is to do a needs assessment that would be completed sometime before May 1st. Districts would then move into a prioritization of what their strategies are, and then an implementation phase with a well-articulated sense of how to leverage summer over in the coming months. That would dovetail perfectly with these other federal dollars coming into play, because they're going to have to prioritize those strategies as part of the recovery work. So that's sort of the landscape right now. And my point to you earlier today was, we have to be attentive to coherence around this. Firstly is that we're fortunate we're going to have sufficient resources to do the work. And I would say ESSER 3, for example, has a tail about to 2023. So it anticipates this work going on for some time. The challenge for us as a state is going to be, how do we make the best strategic use of these funds, not only to meet the near-term sort of needs of students as a result of the COVID emergency, but to think out the other end of this. For example, this idea of community schools or an integrated service delivery model is a very common solution for rural states. And I anticipate when all this is over and done, if we're smart about this, we'll have leveraged these monies to leave that sort of in the landscape as a service delivery model more emphatically and well established in some of our regions that, currently don't necessarily have a well articulated service delivery model. So we have to have a very strategic conversation. So our challenge, one of our biggest challenges, is going to be coherence, I would argue, and to ensure that we're focusing on student need first and having that drive the organizational response, as opposed to starting with the organizational needs and then hoping we hit the student needs. It's a subtle difference, but I think we have to acknowledge right up front that we don't really know what the impact of this emergency is on kids, and we need to give the organization some space to do that initial assessment. And that's why we conclude, across multiple different perspectives, that why in person is so important, because it's hard to do that assessment if we don't have more regular contact with kids. I'll stop there. I mean, that's a long-winded introduction on the spot, but
it's very helpful. Thank you. I think my big question right now, just given timing, again, back to our February 19th letter, which I know you've seen, we did direct $4 million to the After School for All grants program as a way, again, to get so that these programs could hire staff, create new programs, allow families that might not have access. And the chair of appropriations is understandably looking for some language that would give direction to those. Can you just weigh in on if you're still comfortable in moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think I weighed in previously in saying, firstly, the strategy itself is one that's on the radar, totally consistent.
Right,
absolutely. Right. The question, which I had previously, is what's the source of the money? And that wasn't clear to me. And the point I'd make again is that districts are essentially probably going to be the driver's seats in terms of spending the significant amount of funding, both in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, to address these areas.
Yeah.
I think the tension is for us to then sort of help districts, and this is part of our planning activity that's happening around, can we do some planning around summer and around after school to make sure that districts are aware of what's out there, to understand when things are not out there, can we build up some capacity for them? So, right now in some areas, if you look at this as sort of like a menu option, like districts are going to be the driver's seat in terms of spending the money, and they're going to try to figure out what their priorities are. And we're going to help them do that and then help them make good choices relative to those priorities. In some areas of the state, the menu is very limited of options. Like there aren't community rec centers, for example. So we also simultaneously, as they start embarking down this path, we have to attend to at the state level, building up some capacity in these regions. And that's where some of the state level funding and maybe the strategy that you're speaking to would be helpful, is to make sure that there are some options, that there are some program options available for school districts and for communities to leverage, because that's the very unequal part of our state. Not all states have the same resources, not to say they all should be the same, but there need to be some resources and they need to be responsive to the needs of the community and the region. So we have to build up some options simultaneously as districts are going to be in the driver's seat to choose how to deploy those options.
Questions for Secretary French? Senator Persley.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. One of my questions or concerns about the ESSER money is the timing, like specifically for the summer programs. We kind of know the dollar amount, but I don't know how much do you feel like you can get moving on summer programs before you get like the federal guidance, or do you think you could get ready?
It's more about cash flow for districts. So they have, we were talking with superintendents today, ESSER 1 applications are still being filled out. I mean, so that's $30 million. I would argue that's more than sufficient to run summer, and that money's in the bank essentially for them. That deadline for those applications closes on the 20th of March. So we need them to complete those applications. They've been rightfully focused on the CRF funding, but we have about maybe a third of the districts have submitted their ESSER 1 applications. We need them to ramp that up, and I fully expect them to do that. That money's available to run summer programs like right now. ESSER 2, we're going to turn on the ESSER 2 application literally like 2 days later after the 20th of March. That money also is here. It's in the bank. It's ready to go. In ESSER 3, the money will be here and in the bank. I mean, the money comes down very, very quickly, which was the intention. I made the observation that ESSER is probably imperfect to our needs right now, but it provides a very convenient, fast delivery system to get the money out to school districts. So that's happening very quickly. And districts, so from a cash flow standpoint, it's not an issue for them to manage that, and also to pull down, encumber, seek reimbursement. All those things will definitely available for them to do summer programming, for sure.
Please.
Okay, so that's good to know. And I guess maybe my thinking of that $4 million is, which I think you were alluding to earlier, is how can we use it around those other communities that, well, maybe there's a school in every community basically, but maybe not the other community partners that would do an after school program. And if the other money is only for schools, that there's some statewide coordination and capacity building we could do right away as we prepare for this other bigger chunk of money. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think that's really what I'm thinking the appropriate use of the state set aside funds is to really get into that space, identify those priorities. I've been thinking a lot about a sub-granting process to leverage, and, because it's hard for us to describe what the specific solution might look like in a rural community when they have different pieces of things they could bring together. But if we were to describe sort of the general parameters and then give them the opportunity to propose a solution using their resources, at least resources wouldn't be a barrier for them. And then it would allow us to focus those state set-aside funds on the areas that really are lacking in the financial as a barrier. So it would be a win-win. But I think that's exactly how the state set-aside funds are designed to function.
And when you say state set-aside, that's the 10% for AOE?
That's the 10% at the Agency of Education.
Further questions, please? My only request, and I'm not saying this in any way to make extra to work, but if maybe what we can do is just, I think we'll need to build in some time where we can just have kind of regular conversations as these ESSER dollars come in, and we will also be working with the probes again to help guide when we can. In other words, I understand that some of them are specified, some of them are directed, but we're getting questions from constituents and colleagues, and the more that we know, I think and are equipped to respond, the better. So I would leave it. If ever there are updates that you think are important for us to hear, would be great. Even if you have things in writing that you think are important for us to have our eyes on and share with our colleagues, that would also be great. And certainly we'll be in contact to continue these conversations. But can't thank you enough for all that you're doing.
No, thank you. I mean, it's really helpful to have your support on this work. I mean, I've been using the phrase lately a lot. It's all good news, right? I've been saying it a lot with the vaccination program. It's been
Yeah.
really challenging from a
Yeah.
logistical standpoint, but I just keep saying it's all good news, people. We're on, as complex of all these things are, we're on the other side of it now. We're the lights at the end of the tunnel. Our challenge is coherence making and ensuring that student needs are met. We can do that very well as a state. I mean, we're strong on collaboration, so I would welcome the opportunity to share anything along those lines to help us do that. I think I would argue ESSER 3 is going to provoke an interest and a necessity for us to do that, because that's really a sizable amount of funding. And once again, on a national level, seems to be really responsive to the needs of large urban school districts that have never opened. For us, a state like Vermont that benefits from the small state minimum appropriation, we're going to be challenged on the coherence end, but we're up for it, and I think we'll welcome the partnership of the General Assembly, and it's that partnership that's going to make us successful, I'm sure.
And then I'd also just add past crossover to have somebody come in and talk with us just about how schools are faring right now. Yep. It is quite remarkable. I know some schools to our south and certainly to our west and all across the country. A lot of schools are closed, and a lot of children have not had these kinds of experiences that Vermont children have. And of course, it isn't across the state, but it would be great to hear an update.
Yeah, and I agree. It's I have a weekly call with my colleagues in other New England states, yes. And we've been open. All of the New England states have been open to some degree since the beginning. We've all had our ups and downs. But we, just in our call this morning, talking with the Rhode Island chief, totally different context and have some large urban school districts, but the themes are exactly the same. I mean, it's very uneven on a district by district basis. We're seeing indications that some kids have thrived actually during this environment. But once again, we know those students that are at risk beforehand are probably at greater risk now. And it's going to take some time to sort out. So I think it's helpful to have incremental updates, but also to adopt sort of a long view on this. And the funding will support that. As I mentioned, ESSER 3 will go out to 2023. So we just have to be patient and understand, how much stress and strain the system's under right now, just to keep the lights on a daily basis. But again, it's all good news.
Yeah. Senator Hooker, please.
Thank you. I do have a question. Secretary French, you talked about the needs assessment from the districts coming in by May, and with any luck, the legislature goes home in the middle of May, and I'm just curious to know, how, when will you have a good idea of what those needs are and how the money should be distributed?
Well, again, I think I appreciate the question. They're gonna have sufficient funding distributed to them under the ESSER program, and that allocation is not dependent on them articulating need. It's really an straight allocation based on their poverty level. So when we get that, just like we have with the other tranches of ESSER funding, it gets allocated on a poverty level out to the districts, and then they develop grant strategies. I think probably the most efficient tool to get at what you're interested in is how they translate their needs into priorities, and then what do their plan strategies look like. And that information, once again, there'll be a public comment period at the local level. So there's 60 some odd school districts. They'll have 60 some odd prioritizations. And I think that would be very useful information for the General Assembly. And we can also do reporting on how they're spending their money as well. We've done that with the other ESSER funds as well. Or the CRF funding. So we can provide any of that sort of granular input. But I think there'll be patterns. I think we should expect there to be patterns like the issues of truancy and engagement. We've heard, we know that's out there. That's why it's one of our focus domains, but we want to be attentive to how that might play out regionally on a different level. So there'll be patterns for sure.
Thank you.
Senator Perchlik.
Just to go back to the after school thing, we're going to hear from Dr. Morehouse here in a little bit, but I guess I just want to express my interest is that we get a program out as soon as possible, because I already know parents talking about what they're going to do with their kids this summer and things like that. So it sounds like the money's there, and it's just the logistical issue about how to get that out under the street under guidance that's acceptable, and part of this coherence and coherent plan that you're talking about. So, I don't know exactly what our role is in that, but I guess I just want to encourage that if the money that we're talking about in the small budget bill can be helpful to get it happening quickly, that's different than the other money, then that's our goal with that money.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it's useful to understand, all the different funding streams, what their restrictions are, what the pros and cons. But also, I think we'll do well to stay focused on what the need is of the students. We know we need to build out some capacity, and Holly's been involved in some of those planning activities. We also know people are anxious for guidance about the summer. Both from ACCD, the health department, and so forth. We're just not very keen at predicting the future that far out. So we have to encourage patience, but we're well aware that people need some indication of how the summer will proceed. And we have that on our planning sort of calendar.
Other questions? Thank you for staying over with us. I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take
All right,
care.
thank you. Dr. Morehouse, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming early and hearing the testimony. Would appreciate your thoughts. We are, as you know, focused on the dollars right now that we did suggest to appropriations to put in the expedited budget. We know that there are many trains leaving the station, but I think it would be helpful to hear overall your response, if you will, to Secretary French, and let us know how you're feeling as it relates to gearing up for the summer. But first and foremost, if you wouldn't mind reintroducing yourself for the committee.
Thank you so much. So my name is Holly Morehouse. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont After School. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about summer and your committee's attention to summer and how quickly summer is coming up on us. Summer programs that need to open in less than 3 months. And some programs are full, programs are making decisions to go smaller. Parents are making decisions, families are making decisions. So that the timing on this is really, really crucial. I have to say, I cannot express to all of you and those who have known longer would know, I am so excited about ESSER 3. ESSER 3 is amazing. And the set aside for summer learning and after school gives us as a state, and we are so well poised as a state with the Universal After School Task Force, the new governor's group that's working on summer, to move forward in a major way using those one-time funding over the next, it's 2021, 2022, and 2023, I believe, the use of those funds. There is enough money in there to do across our low and middle income elementary and middle schools comprehensive after school and summer programming all across the state, if we as a state have the will, and that comprehensive view that I think Secretary French is speaking to. I think delivering what our children and youth need, and I do think that we have data on where they are and what they need. We do know that this needs to be a summer about connection, healing, reentry, getting outside, being with peers, and learning in all forms of learning, whether it's learning about yourself as you climb a mountain or learn to kayak, or if it's to catch up on your math and reading, or to engage in robotics, or learning how to relate to friends. We are hearing from families that some young people are nervous about reentry and hesitating to come back. We know that isolation and loneliness is a really huge issue. So I feel like we have enough data to know that we need to get kids together in summer programs. I feel like we know that now. And as I said, summer programs are, they're already in planning. Like they're planning now. And we're hearing some that are saying, well, because of COVID, we're going to reduce to 5 weeks. But we're also working really closely with the Pediatricians Association and VCHEP out of UVM and the Department of Health. And we just held a state call forum on Tuesday to get information on the guidance out. And Dr. Brina Holmes spoke to the field then. And the message that we're hearing is that as vaccine rates go up and as we move into summer, that we need to move forward full-fledged planning for summer, right? And youth being outside and taking field trips and being able to go swimming and having the windows down and doing an expansion of enrollment, not a reduction of enrollment. I think we're at a point in time in the state that we need to be saying that loudly and boldly so that people are confident, that youth are confident and looking for opportunities, that parents are confident and signing their children up, and that programs know how many staff to hire and how to get the staff trained. When I look across the tools that we have and the precedents we have, the After School for All grant program that was established when the legislature gave the original $600,000 to expand after school to, funding access to after school in summer, is a program that if money were in there tomorrow, we could open a grant competition and get people moving. And I guess my interest is how do we get people moving quickly? That's the quickest path I can see on how to do that. Because it's putting out an announcement and broadcasting to the state that this is a priority. There is funding available. Expand your programs, open your doors, hire staff, design curricula. At Vermont After School, we have a 7-component, 12-page summer campaign plan to back this up with training for staff, staff recruitment, social emotional learning supports, and we're really pleased to be working closely with the governor's office and the other members of that. The other precedent with the After School for All as an option for this funding is that it does run through AHS and the Child Development Division instead of AOE. But the precedent that I see there, and I'm not trying to say one agency over, I'm just looking at the precedent of this, as though throughout COVID recovery, like when you look at the remote learning childcare hubs in the fall, that was the Child Development Division that stood that up. When you look at the essential childcare, that was the Child Development Division. When you look at the support for summer programs last year, that was the Child Development Division, Department for Children and Families. So when I look at what can we do this summer to move quickly, that's the agency that I'm thinking, right? And the other thing that I do realize and have total respect for is all the planning and the recovery efforts that the Agency of Education is working on with schools. And I don't begin to understand the level of detail when you're looking at which kindergartners need which kind of support and so forth. I want to support that work and partner in that work however possible. I guess I'm seeing this as, I think Secretary French talked about, as a capacity building, right? Another path forward and he also talked about the schools being a stress system, which they are right now, and they're trying to handle all of that. So with After School for All, or through another approach, and this has come up in the Universal After School Task Force as well, when I said we need to be all in, we need a way that it doesn't force schools to carry every bit of the load, right? So After School for All and these other opportunities through the Child Development Division and AHS, has allowed Parks and Rec programs to step in and help out. It has allowed childcare providers to step in and help out, other youth serving organizations. There are schools in that mix who already do this, that are ready to move, that have done childcare hubs in the fall and did programming. So I see that process that AHS has set up as one that they're hitting a lot of segments of the field and using whatever resources are available locally to make what needs to happen for children and youth, instead of saying, we've got to wait for the pause there for any questions.
Senator Persley.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Do you see a way that the individual schools could participate in school districts could participate in like a statewide After School for All grant program, as far as helping, like if they have money and they want to support after school, but instead of them just trying to figure out in their own district, which they might be able to do, but you just see if we're looking at a statewide program as well as the districts having really the money, how those two things connected, or do they have to be separate?
No, I think we've got to connect every resource we have. I will say with After School for All, over the last 2 years that it's run, there are schools that have received those funds as well. So there are schools that are very well versed in after school and summer and these full day summer programs that are about enrichment and activity and adventure based. But they're not all our schools. And in some communities, the schools are not in that space at all yet. And it's another community provider or a partner who is in that space. In some cases, schools contract or partner with somebody like a YMCA who comes in and actually runs the program. In other places, it seems to be completely separate, and there's the school day and the school year, and then there's everything else that happens in the community for young people. So I see it as a mix. I see the $4 million that you all are considering as a way to do that capacity building, right? To sort of level that playing field. And then I think there's a whole nother initiative that I am so anxious to work on with the Agency of Education and other partners about that bigger vision, right? Of what do we do with ESSER 3, and what do we, how do we support schools who are, in different spaces in running after school and summer. I mean, to run a summer program, we really need 8 to 10 weeks of full day summer programming. That's a lot to ask of teachers and schools, but we already have a number of players that do that already over the summer. The other sensitivity I want to have is that there are programs that are enrolled and have been planning for months for summer and are ready to move forward. And if all of a sudden at the last minute, we swoop in and we lay another system down on top of it, where now we're running something else out of the school that's free or different, that's now competing with the thing that's already in place, that's going to do harm. And then when these one-time dollars go away, if we've, sort of challenged the other players who are in this space to the point where they close, then we have nothing after 2023. So it is so essential that as schools think about their plans, they're looking, community-wide and regionally wide at who those partners are and how to play with them and partner with them, so that we do get beyond 2023 to that universal after-school picture that is so exciting and has this amazing web of partnership and collaboration and choice. I think choice is a really, really important for children, youth, and families. That it's not everybody sitting in the same room all summer or doing the same exact activities. There's a lot of choices and movement and different programs and formats that might work for you. That's part of the magic of after school and summer, and I would hate to lose that as well.
So going forward, I've just been in contact a little bit with the Propes, because I know they're looking at a number of different things right now. And as we've said all along, there are many different vehicles leaving the station that could help support the After School for All grant. But I'm wondering, have you been in contact? Have you been in contact with appropriations or testified yet on this?
We have not been asked to testify on this.
Okay. And then also all of the work that you just mentioned going forward, really to have a robust after school and summer programs, that's work that you will work with the agency on. Is that a normal partnership? Just trying to get a sense of our role in some of these things. Of course, whether it's the legislature appropriating dollars or perhaps putting out guidance language around grants, et cetera. But really, is there another role for us, or is that something that you would normally, or you plan to partner with the agency on?
We definitely plan to partner. So we partner closely and have grants and contracts with the Agency of Education, the Department of Health, the Department of Mental Health, the State Treasurer's Office, and the Child Development Division, Department for Children and Families, because the field of after school isn't just schools
Right.
or 21C, right? So we have all of that. So, so my vision, right, as a state, as we look at this broad vision for what do we want to do around after school and summer, I would love to see all those players at the table. And that is another piece of the After School for All program, is that there is an oversight committee that is cross-agency, and it was created intentionally. It goes back to, it was actually an intention of the legislature in a previous bill to have a state oversight committee. And this is something that's come up in the Universal After School Task Force, and I think is absolutely critical at this point in time. And if there is any bill language that your committee might consider, is how to firmly establish that cross-sector oversight committee that has all those different departments and agencies and stakeholders represented, so that we are now and over the next 3 years thinking really intentionally about after school and summer, so that we are not in 2023 forming a new task force that's going back and starting at the beginning and redoing the work of the Universal After School Task Force, but that we have somebody really watching it, and that it's really, it's an important education issue, but it's not only an education issue. And just as a point, and this week and next week, the Child Development Division is rolling out some childcare licensing grants through, I think they call it CURSA, but it's the childcare side of the federal dollars. So we always have this education side and childcare side, and then you have the older youth and teen programs that kind of fall in the gaps and some of the rec programs. So, we need that cross-sector vision. And I think this is a really important point in time to be able to take the work of the Universal After School Task Force, firmly establish a state committee or council or advisory group or whatever that needs to be called, to carry this work forward and to move quickly for this summer, so that we can't miss the summer. We missed last summer in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons. I get it, but we can't miss this summer. And I do worry about the timing of ESSER 3 or ESSER, to address this summer.
Other questions for Dr. Morehouse? Senator Perchlik.
Not more of a comment or it is a comment instead of a question, but it's just about just saying, I think it's a good idea that our $4 million suggestion to appropriations, even hearing what Secretary French said, that I hope we continue with that. And because my understanding that bill would happen pretty quick, get to the governor quick. So then folks like Holly could, start building that capacity right away, why the agency and maybe we would then work on something like this oversight and coordinating committee could work on the 2-year plan or the 3-year plan till we get to a permanent funding for universal after school and summer program.
I agree. I just re-forwarded our letter to Senators Kitchell and Ballant, and Dr. Morehouse. I would recommend you reach out to both of them as soon as possible later today.
I will do that.
I think that would be helpful. Other questions? So, Dr. Morehouse, we'll have you back in, depending on what appropriations decides with this expedited budget, to help them with language around how dollars may be distributed. I kind of loathe to do it now, only because I'd rather wait to see what they are going to do, and then we can go from there.
That sounds great. Thank you.
And if you would let us if you would please be back in touch with me after you've been in touch with Senators Kitchell and Ballant, that would be helpful for me to follow up with them again as well and see what everyone is planning to do. Any other questions for Dr. Morehouse? Okay. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.
Okay. Last item on the agenda, which has following up on yesterday's discussion, waiting study. Mr. Desmarais, we left you yesterday with a number of different discussion points that we thought would be worth incorporating into a new draft. And again, the plan is to have a vote tomorrow and send this to appropriations. And then onto the floor. So just to reiterate, this is as Senator Perchlik said in the banner today, an implementation plan, not a study. Thank you for pointing that out again to my constituents and the people of the state of Vermont. We hope that, I know it's a priority for the pro tem and for many others. So I'm hoping we can do something, and it looks like we might be getting closer. So, Mr. Desmarais, thank you so much for coming up with a new bill. I know I've printed it out and have had a look at it, and if you wouldn't mind taking us through it, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Looking at 2.1, is that what we have?
2.1, correct.
Great,
Yep.
thank you.
And do you want me to bring it up on the screen?
I look to my colleagues. Do people need it?
Is it on the website? I haven't seen it.
Is it on the website? I found it in an email, but that
It is on the
it's on the
website.
website. Okay. Okay. Let us know if you find it. Give everyone a moment. And that's only my personal preference. It's just if we can read it from here, but if someone needs it up, just let me know. You're muted, Senator Pershla.
Which bill are we talking about again?
Oh, sorry. No, this is S13. This is the strike all the waiting study, people waiting factors, not study implementation plan, draft 2.1.
2.1. Okay. Thank you.
Do you have it, Senator Pershlick? Otherwise, I will email you a copy.
No, yeah, I'm
okay. Great. Okay, Mr. Desmarais, if you would. Please.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So for the record, Jim Desmarais, that's counsel. We are walking through draft 2.1 of your amendment to S13. So first of all, we've added findings. These findings are from the original S13 drafted by Senator Baruth. I'll just read through them. First, talks about Act 173, which directed the agency to undertake a study examining and evaluating the current formula used to weight economically disadvantaged students, English language learners, and secondary level students in Vermont for purposes of calculating equalized pupils. The study was also to consider whether new cost factors and weights should be included in the equalized pupil calculation. The findings from that report were stark, say that neither the factors considered by the current formula nor the value of the weights reflect contemporary educational circumstances and costs. The report also found that the current values for the existing weights have weak ties, if any, with evidence describing the difference in the cost of educating students with disparate needs or operating schools in different contexts. And then it goes on to say, as a corrective to this situation, the major recommendations of the report are straightforward, specifically that the General Assembly increase certain of the existing weights and that add population density as a new weighing factor, given the report's finding that rural districts pay more to educate a student. However, given the statewide nature of Vermont's education funding system and the reality that any change in the weighting formula is complex due to its relationship to other educational policies and will produce fluctuations in tax rates across the state, the General Assembly has chosen to develop a phased approach to revising the weighting formula. Pause there. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to talk about?
I will look at any time anyone would like Mr. Desmarais to pause, please. I'm reading, so please just go ahead and shout it out.
Okay. Then we go on to the creation of the task force. And lines 16 to 18 now read, the task force shall recommend to the General Assembly an action plan and proposed legislation to ensure that all public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities, taking into account the report.
Desmarais, I'm sorry, you said lines Ours is not numbered. Are you mean recommendation 16 or?
I'm on page 2.
Yep.
I'm on line 16.
Oh, yes, and ours are not numbered.
Oh, I see.
At least mine is not, so I would, but that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm on the creation of the task force in 2A. There's some new highlighted language.
Thank you.
Talks about having task force coming up with an action plan and proposed legislation. And then it goes on to on page 3 in subsection C. For those with have lines, it's line 11. Powers and duties. The task force shall recommend again to the General Assembly an action plan and proposed legislation to ensure that all public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities, taking into account the report and shall. I moved up number 2. So 1 is to recommend a recommendation around weighting factors, and 2 is to consider the use of categorical aid, either with weighting factors or instead of weighting factors. Because there's a big gain issue here is which way to go. Do you do weighting or do you do categorical aid? So I moved that up in the build language. And then on page 4, the third task, it used to say recommend whether and how to ensure that. Now it says recommend how to ensure that school districts are using funding to meet needs. And then in 4, I just referenced the specific report issued by the Vermont Tax Structure Commission in February. And then I made a number of references to categorical aid as an option to weights to be consistent throughout these description of duties and powers. So you'll see that in 5, in 6, and in 8. Then on page 5, we have a addition to the language around the consultant in section D, line 4, for those of you who have that. And now it says that the consultant shall have expertise and experience in providing advice on Vermont's education funding and tax system, and should be nationally recognized in the field of education funding and tax systems. There's a new subsection E, which requires the task force to collaborate with the V's. The subsection F on the report, again, page 5 again, references that has to, in its report, report on its action plan and proposed legislation. On page page 6, under subsection H, used to have assistance from the Agency of Education, but thinking about this further, given that this is a majority of legislators on this task force, it seems appropriate that you should get technical assistance from JFO and legal assistance from me. So I put that in there.
Okay, thank you.
And then section 3 is the new language around intention going forward. So it reads, during the second year of the 21-22 biennium, the House and Senate Committees on Education, the House Committee on Ways and Means, and the Senate Committee on Finance shall consider the action plan and legislation proposed by the task force. It's the intent of the General Assembly that it passed legislation during the second year of the biennium that implements changes to how education is funded to ensure that all public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities. And this is a positive vote of both the House and Senate, and approved by the governor, would be required to implement these changes. And then the appropriation, did we add a member? Why have we changed the appropriation?
Did we add a number of meetings?
We added, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that. We added,
You have it on page 6.
Double
maybe
the
I did.
meetings.
Yeah, I doubled the meetings. I didn't highlight that. Sorry, I missed that. But we've doubled the meetings from 6 to 12. And that is it. So we still have that hole
Yeah.
on page 7 in terms of the appropriation for the consultant.
I guess for me, wondering, I think my colleagues have probably been more involved over the years with creating these kinds of these things. Anybody have or even Mr. Desmarais, a recommendation on what we might say there? I mean, we had some guidance when we were looking to create a literacy person and other, but when we are putting something out, how do we usually handle that?
Well, not to steer this in terms of the consultant, but given the framing of the language around a consultant, I would imagine that Tammy Colby or Pincus would be in the running for that.
That's helpful.
They both have experience, so that it's not like they're getting up to speed from zero.
Yep.
So I don't know what to start with. I would, as a placeholder there, I would say maybe 40,000. Might be a number, might be too high, but something between 20 and 40, I think would be a place to start.
And
Senator Hooker?
I have a question about the consultant. You said nationally recognized. Does that imply like some kind of national certification in?
No, we've used that language before, just to say there has to be a player, basically.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to recommend, and maybe I'm wrong. 40 does strike me as low, but it seems to me that this kind of work in the number of staff that they would probably hire, it's going to warrant more. And I'm wondering if, and again, not directing this in any way, is there a way, Mr. Desmarais, for you to get a sense from your colleagues who staff appropriations, what we have spent in the past for Dr. Colby or Dr. Pike, just to give us an understanding, again, not directing it, but just what these kinds of things run.
Well, the last one for Picos was 300,000, I believe. This is a more limited engagement,
Yep.
and already based on work that's been done, and for a more limited time period. So I don't remember what was paid for UVM's work on the report last time, the waiting study. I can find that out, but they've already done that work. It's going to be a much bigger number than this would be, I would think. Another way of asking that question is maybe JFO would have a good sense for what this would be. I'm not sure.
I think, Approps will take testimony and come up with it, but I think we should help to give them a starting point. Senator Perschlick.
Yeah, I think it really matters what they do, because the consultant is just to assist with executing its powers and duties of the task force. So they could ask the consultant to do a lot or a little. So it's kind of hard to determine it. But I agree with you. When he said 40, I thought that was possibly low as a maximum amount if they really wanted to do some new modeling and spend a lot of time with go to all the meetings, things like that, then it's probably going to be more.
Senator Lyons?
Right. I was thinking maybe talking with Catherine Benham. She's been very helpful with consultants. So she may have an idea. But between everyone we've just recommended, we'll get an average. We'll get a good piece, a good suggestion.
Mr. Desmarais, are you comfortable reaching out to Ms. Benham on our behalf?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That would be great. And in the meantime, I think that's probably the best spot to start. I think Senator Lyons is right. And I'm guessing it's going to be closer to 100, but I could be wrong. We could also put in, would anybody like a volunteer opportunity? But I'm inclined to think it's going to be close to 100, but I could, again, gives people flexibility around what they might be asking for of this group. So, Okay, other questions or comments regarding the walkthrough? How, just to take everyone's temperature, people feel comfortable moving in this direction tomorrow? We'll put a dollar amount, gives people time to look at things this evening. Again, we are moving in this direction, an implementation plan that also answers some questions that are outstanding. And I feel like this is good work. Okay, great. Okay, not seeing any questions. Thank you, Mr. Desmarais. Thanks for reaching out to Ms. Benham. Really appreciate it.
Did you want me to walk through the summer program language? We didn't do
No,
that.
I don't think so. And the only reason I'd rather wait, and I was just in contact with the pro tem a little bit while we were talking to Dr. Morehouse. I'd rather wait and see what they come up with in terms. That way, we know that will we need something or not, and then we can move from there. And I feel like if we do need something, it's something we can work on a little bit tomorrow. We could work on a little bit next week, and just and ask them to put that language in. Is the way I'm thinking about it. Okay. Senator Perslet, question? Nope. Okay. Any other questions? Tomorrow, again, we do have hoping to move this, hoping to move S100 with, and again, I'm more than happy to continue. We will have more testimony tomorrow on S100, and I'm happy to continue testimony next week. But you want to advance that to the next stage, and as well as our amendment to S16. But seeing no other questions, always feel free to be in contact. And I do hope, if you don't mind, reserving a little extra time tomorrow if we need it. But for now, it looks like we finished a little bit early. So I hope everybody can get outside and enjoy themselves.